You wake to the sound of engines, massive repulsor lift engines that shake the ground beneath your small farmhouse on Lothal, rattling the windows in their frames and sending vibrations through the wooden floorboards that your grandfather installed 40 years ago when he first claimed this plot of land from the prairie. The sound is wrong. Not the familiar hum of cargo transports that occasionally pass overhead on their way to Capital City, but something heavier, more deliberate, the mechanical roar of Imperial military craft descending with purpose. Through the window you see them. 3 Sentinel-class landing craft, painted in the stark gray of the Galactic Empire, their wings folding upward as they settle onto the dirt road that runs through your village of Kotal, kicking up clouds of yellow. Dust that obscure the morning sun. You're 31 years old, a farmer like your father and his father before him, your hands calloused from working the soil, your back strong from lifting harvest crates, your face weathered by Lothal's twin suns. Your life is simple but honest. You grow Jogan fruit and Lothal grain on 40 hectares that produce enough to feed your family and sell surplus at the Capital City market. Your wife Ilara sleeps beside you, her dark hair spread across the pillow, and in the adjacent room, your 2 children, Jin, age 7, and Tarek, age 4, still dream in their beds. The life you have built is modest, but it is yours, earned through sweat and careful stewardship of land that has sustained your family for 3 generations. The engines cut off, and in the sudden silence, you hear something worse. The synchronized march of stormtrooper boots on hard-packed earth, the mechanical commands balked through helmet speakers, the sound of doors being kicked open in neighboring houses. Ilara wakes with a start, her hand finding yours beneath the rough-spun blanket. What's happening? Her voice carries the edge of fear that has become common on Lothal since Governor Arenda Price took control 2 years ago. Since the Empire tightened its grip on your world and began treating citizens as resources to be exploited rather than people to be governed. You dress quickly, pulling on your work clothes, brown trousers and a tan tunic worn soft by years of use, and step into the main room just as the door explodes inward, the lock mechanism shattered by a stormtrooper's rifle butt. 3 white-armored soldiers enter, their T-visors reflecting no humanity, their blaster rifles raised and trained on your chest. Behind them comes an Imperial officer, a lieutenant by his rank insignia, a young man, perhaps 25, with the sharp features and clipped accent of the core worlds. He carries a datapad, and his eyes scan you with the clinical detachment of someone assessing livestock. Jovan Kelrick? He asks, though it's not really a question. He already knows your name, has it listed on his datapad alongside every other able-bodied man in the village. Yes, you reply, your voice steady despite the fear crawling up your spine like cold fingers. The lieutenant activates a holographic projector on his datapad, and the image of Governor Price materializes, her severe features and crimson uniform filling the space between you. It's a recording, not a live transmission, played for efficiency as the same message is delivered to hundreds of homes simultaneously across Lothal's agricultural provinces. Her voice is smooth, practiced, the tone of someone accustomed to absolute authority. By order of the Galactic Empire, and in accordance with Imperial Decree 774 regarding emergency labor conscription, all males between the ages of 18 and 45 are hereby mobilized for essential war production work. You will report immediately to Imperial personnel for processing and transport to designated manufacturing facilities. Service duration will extend until operational requirements are met or until official discharge is granted. Refusal to comply will be treated as sabotage against the Empire and punished accordingly under Imperial military law. The hologram flickers and dies, and the lieutenant's eyes fix on you with bureaucratic indifference. You have 1 hour to gather essential personal items. 1 bag, no more than 10 kilograms. Your family will receive a monthly stipend of 50 credits as compensation for your service. Any questions? 1,000 questions explode in your mind, but only one matters. For how long? Until the Empire no longer requires your service. The lieutenant's expression doesn't change, doesn't acknowledge that he's just told you your imprisonment has no defined end date, that you might be gone for months or years or forever. 1 hour. The transport leaves whether you're on it or not. But if you're not on it, your family will be held accountable for your desertion. They leave, moving to the next house, and you turn to find Ilara standing in the doorway with Jin clutching her, nightgown and Tarek crying silently with the confused fear of a child who knows something terrible is happening but doesn't understand what. You have 1 hour to say goodbye to everything you've ever known. You spend that hour in a blur of mechanical action that your mind will later struggle to remember. You pack a small bag with spare clothes, your grandfather's engraved lighter, a hollow projector containing images of your family. Ilara moves through the house in shock, her hands shaking as she tries to prepare food for you to take. Bread, dried jogan fruit, a flask of water, as if you're going on a normal trip to capital city, rather than being conscripted into forced labor. The children sense the wrongness and cling to you, their small hands gripping your legs as you kneel to hold them one final time. Jin's eyes, so like her mother's, stare into yours with a wisdom beyond her years. "You're coming back, right, Papa?" "Of course," you lie, because what else can you say to a 7-year-old child? "I'll be back before you know it. You be good, help your mother with the farm, and I'll bring you something special when I return." The words taste like ash in your mouth because you don't believe them, can feel in your bones that the Empire doesn't conscript workers it intends to release. When the hour ends, you join 300 other men from surrounding villages in the dirt square that serves as Kothal's community center. Farmers like yourself, mechanics who serviced agricultural equipment, shopkeepers from the village market, teachers from the small school, even old Davril who runs the cantina, all of you standing with small bags clutched in trembling hands, while stormtroopers count heads and check names against datapads. The stormtroopers herd you toward the landing craft with rifle butts and shouted commands, treating you like animals being loaded for slaughter, and when you climb the ramp into the transport's hold, you find no seats, only standing room, bodies, packed so tightly you can barely breathe as more and more men are shoved inside until the space holds perhaps 90 people in an area designed for 40. The ramp closes and the transport lifts off, and through the narrow viewport you catch one final glimpse of Lothal's golden prairie stretching to the horizon, the landscape of your entire life shrinking to a thumbnail and then disappearing as the craft banks and accelerates toward capital city. The flight takes 3 hours and 40 minutes. You mark time by counting your heartbeats since there's nothing else to do. No room to sit or move, just stand pressed against neighbors who smell of fear and sweat and soil. Men who 2 hours ago were free and now are property of the Imperial war machine. Some men cry silently, tears cutting tracks through the dust on their faces. Others stare blankly at nothing, already retreating into whatever mental space will help them survive what comes next. A few try to talk, to share names and stories, to maintain some shred of humanity through connection, but most conversation dies quickly, strangled by fear and the growing realization that talking about your old life only makes the loss more painful. When the transport finally descends and the ramp opens, you stumble out into heat and noise that assault your senses like physical blows. The landing zone is a vast Duracrete platform that stretches for kilometers, crowded with dozens of transports identical to yours, all disgorging their human cargo under the watchful eyes of stormtroopers and the massive gun emplacements positioned at regular intervals along the platform's perimeter. Beyond the platform rises your destination, Weapons Factory Alpha, a nightmare of industrial architecture that sprawls across the landscape like a metallic cancer. The factory complex is enormous. You estimate it covers at least 50 square kilometers, a labyrinth of massive buildings connected by enclosed walkways and pipelines, the whole structure dominated by 16 colossal smokestacks that vomit thick, black smoke into the perpetual red haze of Lothal's industrial zone. The air smells of chemicals and burning metal and something else, Something organic and rotten that you'll later learn is the smell of bodies being incinerated in the factory's waste disposal furnaces when workers die and their corpses need to be disposed of efficiently. You and the other conscripts are formed into columns and march through factory gates big enough to admit AT-AT walkers, past guard towers where E-Web heavy repeating blasters track your movement with mechanical precision, and into a processing center that looks like the interior of a star destroyer. All bare metal walls and harsh fluorescent lighting, and the omnipresent shriek of machinery. Here you're stripped of your civilian clothes and possessions, everything you brought from home confiscated and catalogued, replaced with factory-issue gray coveralls made from coarse synthetic fabric that itches against your skin. An Imperial medical droid scans you with instruments that beep and whir, checking for diseases or physical defects that might make you unsuitable for labor. And you're given an injection of something the droid claims is preventive vaccination, but which burns through your veins like acid and leaves you dizzy and nauseous for the next 6 hours. Finally, you're herded into a vast assembly hall, an indoor space so enormous its far wall is lost in haze, where 10,000 conscripts stand in formation while an Imperial sergeant climbs onto a raised platform and his voice, amplified through speakers mounted on the walls, crashes over you like waves of sound. He's a big man, his gray uniform straining across a barrel chest, his face scarred from some old battle, and when he speaks there's no warmth or humanity in his tone, only the cold efficiency of someone reading specifications for machinery. You are now property of the Imperial Military-Industrial Complex, assigned to Weapons Factory Alpha, under jurisdiction of the Commission for the Preservation of the New Order. You are not prisoners, you are not slaves. You are essential workers serving the Empire in its mission to bring order and security to the galaxy. Your service is compulsory and will continue for the duration of operational necessity. He pauses, letting the words sink in. And you understand the doublespeak. You're prisoners in everything but name, stripped of freedom and choice and basics, rights. But the Empire maintains the legal fiction that you're workers rather than slaves, because the New Order officially abolished slavery, and admitting they practice it would undermine their propaganda. The sergeant continues. Your work shift is 12 hours. Your production quota is 1,000 units per shift. Failure to meet quota results in disciplinary action, including but not limited to reduced rations, corporal punishment, and reassignment to hazardous duty sections. Sabotage of equipment or materials is treason and will be punished by immediate execution. Attempting to escape will result in the arrest and execution of your family members on your home world. Any questions? Silence answers him, her 3,000 men standing mute because what question could possibly matter when the answers are already clear? You work or you die, and possibly your family dies with you. The sergeant nods with satisfaction. Good. You will now be assigned to work sections. When your designation is called, proceed to the designated corridor for orientation. Section assignments are permanent unless operational needs require transfer. Dismissed to section assignments. What follows is hours of bureaucratic chaos as names are read from datapads, and groups of workers are directed to different corridors leading deeper into the factory complex. When your name is finally called, Kelric Jovan, assigned to Assembly Section 47, E11 Blaster Rifle Production Line. You join 50 other men and are led by a guard droid through kilometers of corridors that all look identical. Gray, metal walls, exposed pipes carrying fluids that hiss and gurgle, hanging industrial lights that flicker intermittently, the constant bass rumble of massive machinery operating somewhere beneath your feet. The air grows hotter and more contaminated the deeper you go, until you're breathing thick, chemical-laden atmosphere that makes your lungs burn and your eyes water. Section 47 is a nightmare given form. The chamber is perhaps 300 meters long and 60 wide, its ceiling lost in darkness 40 meters overhead, its walls lined with manufacturing equipment that roars and sparks and pounds with relentless mechanical fury. The centerpiece is the assembly line itself, a massive conveyor belt that runs the length of the chamber, moving at constant speed, carrying an endless stream of E-11 blaster rifle components from the machining stations at the far end toward the packaging stations near the exit. The line never stops, never slows, operates 24 hours per day in 3 8-hour shifts, except you'll learn that 8-hour shifts is another lie. That in reality, shifts run 12 to 14 hours, depending on production demands and the sadism of your supervisors. Your position is Station 73, midway down the assembly line where your job, explained in a 90-second orientation by a dead-eyed supervisor who clearly doesn't care whether you understand or not, is to install the power cell housing into each blaster rifle body as it passes your station. The power cell housings arrive via a secondary conveyor running perpendicular to the main line. You take a housing, check that the connection ports are aligned correctly, slot it into the rifle body, engage the locking mechanism with a pneumatic press activated by a foot pedal, and release the completed assembly back onto the main conveyor. The entire operation takes approximately 15 seconds per rifle. With 4 rifles per minute and 12-hour shifts, you'll install power cell housings in approximately 2,880 rifles per shift, assuming you never slow down or make mistakes or succumb to fatigue. The shift begins immediately. There's no further training, no practice period, just the conveyor lurching into motion and rifle bodies flowing past your station in an endless stream, while supervisors patrol the line with electroprods and datapads, watching for any slowdown or error. The first hour is manageable. Your hands moving through the unfamiliar motions with awkward precision, concentration keeping you focused despite the noise and heat and the growing ache in your lower back from standing hunched over the conveyor. By the third hour, your hands are cramping, fingers stiff from the repetitive motion and the constant vibration of the pneumatic press. By the 5th hour, your back is screaming, vertebrae grinding together as muscles designed for varied agricultural labor rebel against the unnatural posture required by your station. By the 8th hour, you're operating on pure survival instinct, your mind detached from your body, watching from somewhere distant as your hands continue their mechanical routine without conscious direction. And then you make your first mistake. A rifle body comes down the line slightly misaligned, rotated 15 degrees from proper orientation, and your fatigued brain doesn't register the error until you've already tried to install the power cell housing. It doesn't fit properly, the connection ports miss their targets, and precious seconds tick past while you fumble with the component, trying to correct the alignment. The conveyor doesn't stop. The next rifle body arrives at your station before you've finished with the first, and suddenly you're behind, trying to work on 2 rifles simultaneously, and the one you couldn't fix properly moves past you down the line, a defective unit that will be caught at the quality control station 3 positions downstream. The supervisor appears instantly, as if materialized by your failure, his electro-prod crackling blue energy as he jams it into your ribs. The shock is agony, every muscle in your torso contracting violently, and you collapse against the conveyor, barely catching yourself before falling completely. "Defective work!" the supervisor screams, his face centimeters from yours, breath hot and smelling of processed rations and stale calf. "You cost the Empire time and materials. Get back in position and work faster." The electro-prod jabs again. Shorter this time, but no less painful, and you haul yourself upright and resume your station while your hands shake and your ribs throb, and the rifles keep coming, always coming, never stopping. The shift continues for 4 more hours, each minute an eternity of repetitive motion and growing pain, until finally a klaxon sounds and the conveyor lurches to a halt, and the supervisor announces through a megaphone, "First shift concluded. Proceed to barracks for rations and rest period. Second shift reports in 6 hours. 6 hours. 6 hours to eat and sleep and try to recover enough strength to do it all again, tomorrow and the next day and the next, extending into an undefined future, measured not in days or weeks, but in rifle assemblies completed, quotas met or missed punishments endured. You shuffle toward the exit along with your section's other workers, a shuffling column of exhausted men moving through corridors toward the residential block. The barracks is a massive structure divided into 50-person dormitories, each dormitory a single rectangular room 60 meters by 20 meters, with 3-tiered bunks arranged in tight rows. The bunks themselves just metal frames with thin mattresses that feel like they're stuffed with recycled insulation. No sheets or blankets because the factory ambient temperature is maintained at 30 degrees Celsius year-round to optimize machinery performance, regardless of worker comfort. The ceiling is low enough that you can touch it standing on the second-tier bunks, and the air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and inadequate waste recycling systems. The toilet facilities are at the dormitory's end. A row of 20 open stalls with outdoors or privacy dividers. Just Durasteel commodes arranged side by side over a waste trough that occasionally flushes with a rush of blue chemical fluid that doesn't quite mask the stench. The showers are adjacent, another open room with 12 water nozzles protruding from the walls, and you're informed by a supervisor that water is available once per week for exactly 10 minutes per 50 workers, meaning you have approximately 12 seconds of water contact if the distribution is equal. Though in reality, the strongest workers monopolize the nozzles, and you'll be lucky to get 30 seconds of lukewarm spray to rinse 2 weeks of accumulated grime and chemical residue from your skin. The food arrives on automated delivery carts, a tray for each worker containing a bowl of gray nutrient paste that tastes vaguely of vegetables and synthetic protein, a slice of dense black bread that's dry enough to crack your teeth, and a cup of water that tastes metallic from the factory's recycling system. You consume your ration sitting on your assigned bunk, third tier, corner position, the worst spot because heat rises and you're pressed against the wall and the ceiling, and the food sits heavy and unsatisfying in your stomach, barely enough calories to replace what you burned during the shift, but exactly enough to keep you functional for tomorrow's work. All around you, men collapse onto bunks and fall immediately into exhausted sleep. Some still wearing their work coveralls, others stripping down to undergarments in a futile attempt to stay cooler. Some weep quietly into their thin mattresses. Others stare at the ceiling with empty eyes. A few attempt conversation, trying to maintain human connection, but most talk dies quickly, strangled by fatigue and the growing understanding that talking requires energy they need to conserve for survival. You lie down on your mattress, your back still screaming from 12 hours hunched over the assembly line, your hands cramping randomly as overworked muscles spasm, your lungs burning from chemical-saturated air, and you close your eyes and try to sleep despite the constant noise. The rumble of machinery from below, the groans and coughs and sleep cries of 50 men crowded into inadequate space, the periodic announcements from wall-mounted speakers reminding you of factory regulations and production quotas. You sleep 4 hours, perhaps, the sleep shallow and interrupted, your dreams filled with assembly lines and rifles and supervisors with electro-prods. And then the klaxon shrieks you back to consciousness, and you discover every muscle in your body has stiffened overnight, that standing requires concentration and willpower, that you're already exhausted before the day begins. 6 hours between shifts means time for sleep, but no time for recovery, no time for your body to heal before you break it again, and you understand with sudden terrible clarity that this is the cycle that will define your existence. Work until damaged, rest inadequate for repair, work again while incrementally more damaged. The accumulated wear grinding you down day by day until your body fails completely and you become one of the casualties that everyone references, but nobody talks about directly. The second day is worse than the first, your body protesting every motion, your hands fumbling more frequently as repetitive strain injuries begin to develop in your wrists and fingers. You make 3 errors during the shift, each one earning you electroprod punishment that leaves you twitching and gasping. By the 5th day, your hands are covered in small cuts and chemical burns from handling components without adequate protective equipment. By the 2nd week, you've lost noticeable weight. your ribs beginning to show through skin that's taken on an unhealthy pallor from lack of sunlight and poor nutrition. By the third week, you no longer remember what it felt like to not be in pain, to not be exhausted, to not be standing at Station 73 installing power cell housings into an infinite procession of blaster rifles. And then you witness your first death. It happens on day 23, during the morning shift, at Station 88, 3 positions downstream from yours. The worker there, a man named Petrick from a village near yours, a carpenter by trade with gentle hands, better suited for shaping wood than assembling weapons, is installing the trigger assemblies when something goes catastrophically wrong. Perhaps he fumbled the installation. Perhaps the component itself was defective. Perhaps his exhausted brain simply made a fatal error in the sequence. The trigger assembly includes a microfusion cell that powers the blaster's ignition system, and when improperly installed, the cell can short-circuit and detonate. The explosion is small but devastating in the confined space of the assembly line. You're looking in that direction when it happens, see the white flash and hear the sharp crack of detonation, and then Petrick is screaming, his hands and face engulfed in chemical fire that burns with intense yellow flame. The kind of fire that clings to flesh and can't be smothered easily. He staggers backward from the line, his screams high and continuous, and other workers scatter away from him as he careens through the station trailing smoke and the stomach-churning smell of cooking meat. A supervisor appears with a fire suppression canister and sprays Petrick down with white foam that extinguishes the flames, but also causes him to collapse, his screams cutting off into awful gurgling sounds. The medical droid arrives 5 minutes later, hovering on repulsor lifts, its multiple manipulator arms extending to scan Petrick's body where he lies convulsing on the factory floor. You're close enough to see the extent of the damage. His hands are blackened stumps, fingers burned away entirely. The flesh of his forearms cooked down to exposed bone in places. His face is a horror, features melted and distorted, eyes swollen shut, lips burned away to reveal teeth in a permanent rictus. The droid administers something via injection and Petrick goes still, unconscious or dead. You're not sure which, and you're not sure which would be more merciful. 2 worker-class droids roll over with a hover stretcher, load Petrick's body onto it, and remove him from the factory floor, the whole process taking less than 3 minutes from explosion to clean up. The supervisor resets Station 88, where a new worker is installed within minutes, and the conveyor restarts, and production continues as if nothing happened. Nobody announces Petrick's fate. Nobody offers information about his condition or whether he survived. He's simply gone, erased from the production line, and his absence is filled immediately because the Empire's war machine doesn't pause for individual tragedies. That night in the barracks, you ask the worker in the adjacent bunk, an older man named Corvin who has been at the factory for 8 months, what happens to injured workers. Corvin's expression is haunted when he answers, "Depends on the injury. Minor stuff, cuts and burns and broken fingers, the medical droids fix you up enough to work and send you back to the line. Serious injuries that cost you ability to work, they send you to the medical block and you don't come back. My cousin got both legs crushed by a loader droid 3 months ago. Never saw him again." His voice drops lower. There's stories about the furnaces in the waste disposal section, about how the factory has quotas for material recycling, and how human remains count as organic material that can be incinerated for energy recovery. Don't know if it's true, but... He doesn't finish the sentence. Doesn't need to, because you both understand the implication. The Empire that treats you as production units rather than people wouldn't hesitate to dispose of workers who become liabilities to burn your bodies as fuel for the same furnaces that smelt metal for weapons used to conquer the galaxy. The thought is so horrifying that your mind rejects it, but over the following weeks, you accumulate evidence that supports the theory. Workers disappear regularly, sometimes from obvious injuries like Petrick's burns, but often from less visible causes like exhaustion-induced heart failure or respiratory collapse from toxic air exposure, and none of them ever return from the medical block. The factory population should be accumulating injured veterans if the Empire was treating and holding them, but instead, the population remains constant, a steady state maintained by new conscripts arriving to replace those who disappear. And the only explanation that makes mathematical sense is that disabled workers are being disposed of rather than supported. The dangers are everywhere, woven into the fabric of factory operations. In the power cell assembly section, where workers install and test the energy cells that power blaster weapons, explosions from manufacturing defects or worker error kill an average of 2 people per week. In the barrel fabrication section, where high-temperature lathes machine the barrels from duralloy ingots, workers lose fingers and hands to the rotating machinery with disturbing regularity. In the chemical processing plant, where the Tabana gas used in blaster bolts is refined and pressurized, gas leaks create clouds of toxic vapor that send workers into convulsing fits, their lungs dissolving from the inside while they drown in their own liquefied tissue. In the heavy fabrication shops where components for AT-AT walkers and AT-ST Scout walkers are assembled, massive hydraulic presses and assembly cranes crush workers who move too slowly or make positioning errors, reducing human beings to pulp between tons of metal. The factory operates without meaningful safety equipment because safety equipment costs credits that the Empire prefers to spend on production capacity rather than worker protection. You have thin gloves that develop holes within days and offer no protection against chemicals and heat. You have goggles that fog and crack and barely shield your eyes from metal shavings and chemical splashes. You have no respirator despite working in air contaminated with dozens of toxic compounds, metals like beryllium and chromium from machining operations, organic solvents from cleaning chemicals, combustion products from welding and smelting. Every breath deposits particulates deep into your lungs, beginning the process of scarring and cellular damage that will eventually develop into cancer or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, conditions that will kill you years from now even if you survive the factory itself. The noise is constant and damaging, the industrial cacophony of thousands of machines operating simultaneously, presses stamping metal, lathes spinning at a high RPM, conveyor motors grinding, warning klaxons shrieking, supervisors shouting through megaphones, all of it echoing through metal chambers at volumes that exceed 100 decibels during peak production. Your ears ring constantly, a high-pitched whine that never stops even during rest periods, and within 2 months you notice your hearing degrading, supervisors' instructions becoming harder to understand, conversations in the barracks requiring you to ask for repetition. Corvin tells you that long-term workers, those who survive past 1 year, are usually partially deaf, their hearing destroyed permanently by sustained noise exposure that damages the delicate structures of the inner ear beyond the body's ability to repair. By your 3rd month in Weapons Factory Alpha, you no longer resemble the farmer who left Lothal's golden prairies. Your body has transformed through malnutrition and overwork into something gaunt and desperate. You've lost 14 kilograms, your frame carrying barely any fat reserves, muscle atrophied from the specific repetitive motions required by assembly line work that use the same muscle groups constantly while allowing others to weaken. Your hands are scarred and permanently stained by chemical exposure. The fingernails yellowed and brittle, several fingertips numb from nerve damage. Your back is curved from the permanent hunch required by your workstation's ergonomically terrible design. Your skin is pale gray, drained of color by artificial lighting and lack of sunlight, covered in rashes and small sores that heal slowly due to malnutrition. Your teeth are loosening from scurvy, your gums bleeding each morning when you chew the hard bread ration, and you've developed a persistent cough from the chemical exposure, each morning hack bringing up gray-brown sputum flecked with blood from damaged lung tissue. The psychological transformation is worse than the physical. You no longer think about the future, about returning home to Ilara and the children, because hope is a luxury that requires energy you cannot spare. You think only about the next shift, the next meal, the next sleep period. Your consciousness narrowed to immediate survival. You no longer feel anger at your captors or sorrow for your situation. Emotions have been burned away by exhaustion and the need to conserve all psychological resources for the mechanical performance of your duties. You are becoming exactly what the Empire wants. A biological machine, a unit of production that performs its function and asks no questions and requires minimal maintenance until it fails and is discarded. But humans are social creatures, even under extreme conditions, and despite the Empire's efforts to reduce you to isolated production units, connections form. You bond with the workers at adjacent stations, Merrill at Station 72 and Koth at Station 74, through brief exchanges during the seconds when the conveyor pauses for mechanical adjustment, through shared glances of understanding when supervisors pass, through the simple recognition that you're all suffering the same nightmare. You learn about their families, their lives before conscription, and you tell them about your farm and your children, and these fragments of human connection become vital anchors to your humanity. Reminders that you are Jovan Kelrick, that you existed before the factory and might somehow exist after it. It's Koth who first whispers about resistance. 4 months into your imprisonment, during a brief moment when the conveyor has halted for maintenance and the supervisors are occupied elsewhere, he leans close and his voice barely audible over the ambient machinery noise. There's talk. Some of us are planning something. Counting weapons, mapping supervisor routines, looking for weak points. We can't live like this. We have to fight. You want to tell him that fighting is suicide, that the Empire will crush any resistance with overwhelming force, that the best strategy is to endure and hope for eventual release or rescue by forces beyond your control. But you can't make yourself speak those words because you know they're lies. Know that there will be no release, that you'll work in this factory until your body fails and you're disposed of in the waste furnaces. So instead, you nod slightly. I'm listening. Over the following weeks, a network forms among perhaps 40 workers across multiple sections, coordinated through whispered conversations during breaks and coded scratches on bathroom stall walls and brief hand gestures exchanged. When supervisors aren't watching, the plan is desperate and poorly conceived because you're all exhausted workers with no military training trying to organize revolution against the galaxy's most powerful military force, but desperation breeds audacity. The goal is to wait for a shift change when supervisor coverage is minimal. Overpower the guards in your section, break into the armory where completed blasters are stored for shipment, arm yourselves, and use the threat of sabotaging factory equipment to negotiate for release. It's a fantasy, you realize even as you participate in planning. But it's a fantasy that gives you purpose beyond mechanical survival, and purpose is something you desperately need. The attempt comes on a night shift 5 months into your imprisonment. The signal is a dropped tool clanging on metal floor, the sound echoing through Section 47, and suddenly 40 workers are moving in coordination for the first time since conscription. You rush a supervisor from behind, your hands, strengthened by months of repetitive work despite malnutrition, closing around his throat before he can activate his comlink to call reinforcements. Beside you, Merrill and Koth are attacking another supervisor, beating him with improvised clubs made from broken conveyor components. Across the section, similar assaults are happening simultaneously. Workers who have spent months being brutalized, taking revenge on their tormentors with frantic violence. The attack succeeds for perhaps 90 seconds, during which you manage to disarm 3 supervisors and kill one, the one you strangled, his neck snapping beneath your grip with a sound like breaking wood. And you're running toward the armory access corridor when the factory's security system activates. Blast doors slam shut across the section exits, trapping everyone inside, and automated defense turrets descend from ceiling mounts, their targeting systems painting you with red lasers. A synthesized voice booms from speakers. Security breach detected in Section 47. All personnel cease movement immediately or face lethal force. Koth, ahead of you in the rush toward the armory, either doesn't hear the warning or chooses to ignore it. The turret fires once, a single, precisely targeted blaster bolt that strikes him in the back and punches through his torso, the superheated plasma cauterizing even as it kills. He falls without sound, dead before he hits the floor, smoke rising from the fist-sized hole that goes completely through his body. The sight stops you cold, survival instinct overriding revolutionary fervor, and you raise your hands in surrender along with most other insurgents who are still alive. The blast doors open and stormtroopers flood into the section, dozens of white-armored soldiers with rifles raised, followed by Imperial officers and interrogation droids hovering on repulsor lifts with their injection needles and pain inducement, circuits clearly visible. The surviving insurgents, 23 men including yourself, are forced to the floor, hands behind heads, while the stormtroopers bind you with stun cuffs that send continuous low-level electric shocks through your wrists, keeping you pacified and disoriented. They drag you and the others to a detention block, separate cells where you spend 2 days in isolation, and then to an interrogation chamber where droids extract information about the rebellion through chemical and electrical persuasion that leaves you convulsing and vomiting and begging for death. But they don't execute you immediately. Instead, on the 3rd day, all 20,000 factory workers are marched from their sections to the main assembly plaza, a vast open space at the factory's center normally used for cargo staging. The 23 captured rebels are displayed on a raised platform bound to posts, and an Imperial commander, a captain you've never seen before, his uniform crisp and face showing the well-fed health of someone who has never missed a meal, addresses the assembled workforce through amplifier. "You work at this facility by order of the Galactic Empire," he announces, his voice echoing across the plaza. "Your labor is essential to maintaining order and security throughout the galaxy. Your service is honorable and necessary. But there are those among you who seek to disrupt production, to sabotage the Empire's mission, to place their selfish interests above the greater good. Such actions cannot be tolerated. Such actions constitute treason, and treason has only one punishment." He nods to a firing squad of stormtroopers positioned before the platform. They raise their rifles in perfect synchronization, and you watch from your position bound to the post as they execute your co-conspirators one by one, starting from the far left and working across. Each shot is precisely placed, the stormtroopers' training evident in their marksmanship, each bolt striking center mass and killing instantly. You count the shots, 1, 2, 3, 4, and watch men you've worked beside for months jerk and slump against their bonds, smoke rising from fatal wounds, and the smell of burned flesh and ozone washes over you, and you want to close your eyes, but force yourself to watch because these men deserve to have their deaths witnessed, to not die unacknowledged. The trooper reaches you, raises his rifle, and you stare down the barrel and think of Alara and Jin and Tarek, and you hope they're safe, and you hope they remember you, and you hope. The shot doesn't come. Instead, the commander raises his hand, stopping the execution. "This one lives," he says, pointing at you. "Leave him bound here for 3 days as an example. No food, no water. Let every worker see what happens to those who plot against the Empire. The others," he indicates the 4 remaining prisoners, "execute them." 4 more shots crack across the plaza, and then there's only you, alone among corpses, bound to your post while the commander dismisses the assembled workforce back to their stations and production resumes. You stand there for 3 days exactly as promised, the sun of Lothal beating down during daylight hours, and the cold of night leaching heat from your body. No food or water, no ability to sit or lie down, urinating and defecating where you stand, because you have no choice. Workers passing between sections glance at you furtively, and you see in their eyes a mixture of pity and relief. Relief that they were smart enough not to join the rebellion, that it's you up there rather than them. By the 3rd day, you're hallucinating from dehydration, seeing Alara standing in the crowd, though you know she's not there, hearing Jin calling for you, though the voices are just echoes in your damaged mind. When they finally cut you down, you collapse immediately, unable to stand, and they drag you to the medical block where a droid administers intravenous fluids and stimulants that pull you back from the edge of death. You spend 5 days recovering enough strength to work, and then you're returned to Station 73, to the same assembly line, to the same mechanical routine of installing power cell housings into endless blaster rifles. But everything has changed. The failed rebellion has broken something in the workforce's spirit. You see it in how workers no longer make eye contact, how conversations cease entirely, how each person isolates themselves psychologically as the safest strategy for survival. The Empire has won not just through violence, but through the demonstration that resistance is futile, that any attempt to fight back will be crushed with overwhelming force and public cruelty. The months that follow blend into a gray eternity of work and exhaustion and deteriorating health. You develop chronic respiratory problems, coughing constantly, sometimes coughing up blood from lesions in your lungs where chemical exposure has killed tissue. Your hands develop permanent tremors from nerve damage. You lose 4 teeth to malnutrition-induced periodontal disease. Your vision degrades, probably from vitamin deficiency. Objects beyond 10 meters becoming progressively blurrier. You're 32 years old, but your body feels 60, broken down and wearing out, and you understand with certainty that you will die here, that your body will give out eventually and you'll collapse at your station and be dragged away to the waste. Disposal furnaces and incinerated, your ashes vented through those massive smokestacks to drift across Lothal's industrial zones as particulate pollution. But then something impossible happens. 18 months into your imprisonment, during a typical shift indistinguishable from 1,000 others, the factory's power dies. Not gradually, not from rolling blackouts or controlled shutdowns, but instantly, lights cutting out, machinery grinding to a halt, conveyor belts stopping mid-motion. For 30 seconds there's darkness and confusion, and then emergency lighting activates, bathing everything in dim red glow. Alarms begin shrieking, not the normal production alarms, but security warnings, and over the intercom comes a panicked Imperial voice. All supervisors to security stations, we are under attack. Repeat, facility under attack. You don't know what's happening, but it doesn't matter because suddenly the factory is chaos, supervisors running toward defensive positions while workers stand confused at their stations. Through the windows you see explosions blooming in other parts of the factory complex, massive fireballs that punch through walls and send debris tumbling. The building shakes from impacts that sound like orbital bombardment or possibly internal sabotage. Dust raining from the ceiling as structural supports groan. Later, you'll learn the full story, that the Spectres, the rebel cell operating on Lothal, coordinated with Alliance forces to strike multiple Imperial facilities simultaneously, that Weapons Factory Alpha was a primary target because of its strategic importance, that Jedi survivors Kanan Jarrus and Ezra Bridger led teams that penetrated factory security and planted explosives at critical infrastructure points. But in the moment, all you know is that the Empire is losing control and opportunity exists. A supervisor runs past your station and you grab him without thinking, your hands closing on his throat exactly as they did during the failed rebellion, and this time, when you squeeze, there's no stormtroopers to stop you, no turrets to shoot you. Down. He struggles and dies, and you take his comlink and his access card, and you start running, joining hundreds of other workers who have the same idea, all of you flooding toward exits that are no longer sealed because security systems are offline. You reach the outside, and it's the first time in 18 months you've breathed air that isn't recycled through factory environmental systems. The air is still polluted. You're in Lothal's industrial district after all, but compared to factory atmosphere, it tastes clean and you gulp it desperately while explosions continue rocking the facility. All around you, workers are escaping, streaming through gates that stand open because their automated defenses are offline, running into the surrounding cityscape where Imperial forces are too occupied, fighting rebels to stop fleeing slaves. You run until your damaged lungs give out, stumbling into an alley between warehouse buildings where you collapse against a wall and cough blood and wheeze and cry. Not from pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization that you're free. Free. The word has no meaning after so long. Seems impossible, but you're outside the factory walls and nobody is forcing you to return to your station, and the assembly line is behind you. A rebel soldier finds you 3 hours later. A Twi'lek woman wearing improvised armor and carrying a blaster rifle. And she offers you water and a medical kit and information. The Empire is in full retreat. We've destroyed or damaged the 16 major military facilities on Lothal in the last 48 hours. We're evacuating civilians and freed prisoners off-planet before reinforcements arrive. There's transports leaving from the Jothal spaceport. You should go. But you don't want to leave Lothal, not without finding your family, and you tell her this and she provides you with civilian clothes and credits enough for transport, and you begin the journey back to your village. It takes you 4 days because public transportation is disrupted by the fighting and you're too weak to travel quickly. When you finally reach Kotal, you find the village damaged by Imperial reprisals. Several buildings burned, fields scorched, but still standing, still inhabited by survivors who gather around you with shock and compassion when they recognize who you are beneath the damage. Ilara is gone. The neighbors tell you she fled with the children 6 months ago when Imperial forces began arresting families of suspected rebel sympathizers, that she took Jin and Terek and left Lothal entirely, seeking refuge with her sister on Alderaan. They give you a data chip she left behind, containing a holographic message recorded months ago. You activate it in the ruins of your farmhouse and Ilara's image appears, her face thin and worried. Jovan, if you're seeing this, you're alive. Thank the Force. We had to leave. The Empire arrested 3 families on our street. Said they were relatives of factory rebels. I couldn't risk the children. We're going to Alderaan, to my sister Mira's home in Aldera. Find us there when you can. I love you. Come home to us. You book passage on a smuggler's transport using the last of your credits, and the journey to Alderaan takes 8 days through backwater hyperspace routes, avoiding Imperial patrols. When you finally arrive at Amira's residence, a modest apartment in Aldera's residential district, and Ilara opens the door. She doesn't recognize you for 3 full seconds. Then her hand flies to her mouth and she makes a sound between a sob and a gasp. Jovan. You see yourself through her eyes. A skeletal figure weighing perhaps 55 kilograms when you should weigh 75. Your skin gray and covered in chemical burns and scars. Your hair mostly gone, your eyes sunken deep in their sockets, your hands shaking with permanent tremors, your breathing labored and wheezing. You're 33 years old and look 60. The man she married no longer exists in any recognizable form. The children are terrified of you. Jin hides behind her mother, and Terek, now 6 years old, having lived nearly half his life without you, cries when you try to hold him. You're a stranger wearing their father's voice, a monster from nightmares rather than the parent they remember. It takes weeks before they'll willingly approach you, and even then there's hesitation, uncertainty, as if they're constantly waiting for you to transform back into something frightening. You try to rebuild your life on Alderaan. Mira's husband finds you work in a warehouse, moving inventory, but you last 3 days before collapsing from exhaustion. Your damaged body unable to handle even light physical labor. A doctor examines you and delivers a diagnosis that's really a death sentence. Severe chemical pneumonitis, liver cirrhosis from toxin exposure, malnutrition, induced organ damage, probable cancerous lesions in your lungs and digestive tract. You have perhaps 2 years, the doctor says with clinical detachment. Maybe 3 if you're fortunate. I'm sorry. But the damage is too extensive for Bacta therapy to reverse. You spend those 2 years trying to be a husband and father again, but you're haunted by the factory in ways that make normal life impossible. You can't sleep more than 2 hours without nightmares. Dreams where you're back at Station 73, where the conveyor never stops, where supervisors beat you with electroprods, where Koth dies again and again and you can't save him. Loud noises send you into panic attacks, your heart racing and breath coming in gasps while you relive explosions and executions. You can't work because your body is destroyed and your mind is broken. You exist as a ghost in your own family, present physically but absent in every way that matters. Ilara tries to hide it, but you see the strain in her face, the exhaustion of caring for a dying husband while raising 2 children alone, and you hate yourself for being a burden, for surviving the factory only to bring home your broken shell, rather, then dying there and sparing them this slow deterioration. The children grow distant, bonding with their mother and uncle while you sit in corners, coughing blood into rags. And you don't blame them, because what child wants to be near a walking corpse who smells of sickness and can barely speak without wheezing on your good days, and there are fewer of them as months pass? You write. You document everything about Weapons Factory Alpha in a journal that fills 200 pages with cramped handwriting. The working conditions, the deaths, the systematic cruelty, the names of every worker you can remember who died in that industrial hell. You write it because someone needs to know, needs to remember that 20,000 men were enslaved in that facility alone, that thousands died, that the Empire built its war machine on broken bodies and ground-up lives. You write it because if you don't document the truth, the Empire's official records will stand unchallenged, claiming the factory was fully automated and no forced labor occurred. 2 years and 4 months after your liberation, you die in your sleep from respiratory failure, your lungs finally unable to process oxygen through scar tissue and tumors. You're 35 years old. Ilara finds you in the morning, your face peaceful for the first time in years, and she weeps not just from grief, but from relief that your suffering has ended. Your journal survives you. Mira gives it to a Rebel Alliance intelligence operative, and it becomes part of the growing documentation of Imperial atrocities, evidence used in Alliance propaganda, and eventually a New Republic war crimes tribunals. Your testimony, combined with thousands of others from survivors of Imperial forced labor programs, helps establish that the Empire's industrial capacity was built on systematic slavery, that millions of beings were conscripted into factories and mines, and shipyards, and worked to death producing weapons used to oppress the galaxy. But the galaxy moves on. The rebellion becomes the New Republic. The Empire fragments into warlord territories. Alderaan is destroyed by the Death Star 2 years after your death, killing Ilara and Jin and Terek and Mira's entire family, vaporizing their bodies and your grave, and your journal's original copy in the superlaser blast that murders 2 billion people. Your family's suffering, your death, the deaths of thousands at Weapons Factory Alpha, all of it becomes statistics, numbers in historical databases, footnotes in academic studies of Imperial labor practices. And the cycle continues because the fundamental conditions that enabled your enslavement, authoritarian power structures, the dehumanization of populations deemed expendable, the prioritization of military production over human welfare, the willingness of governments to treat sentient beings as resources rather than people. These conditions don't end with the Empire's fall. The New Republic faces its own labor exploitation scandals. Corporate sectors maintain prison labor programs that differ from Imperial conscription more in branding than substance. Outer Rim worlds continue to operate under conditions barely distinguishable from slavery, because economic systems that profit from exploitation don't voluntarily reform. Somewhere in the galaxy, at this very moment, a being stands at an assembly line, their hands moving through repetitive motions they can perform without conscious thought, their body breaking down from malnutrition and chemical exposure and overwork, their spirit crushed beneath the weight of systematic dehumanization. Perhaps they work for a different government or corporation. Perhaps the specific products differ. Perhaps the rhetoric justifying their exploitation has changed. But the fundamental reality remains identical. They are production units, their lives measured in output rather than dignity. Their deaths recorded as acceptable losses rather than tragedies. Your life mattered. Your suffering was real. Your resistance, though it failed, was courageous. The love you felt for Ilara and Jin and Terek was genuine and powerful. You were Jovan Kelrick, farmer from Lothal, father and husband, a man who valued honest work and simple joys, and the Empire murdered you as surely as if they'd executed you at that plaza alongside your fellow rebels. They just did it slowly, over years, grinding you down until nothing remained but pain and broken tissue. But you were one of millions. Millions who worked in factories like Weapons Factory Alpha, in Tibana gas mines on Bespin, in Kyber crystal extraction operations on Jeddah, in shipyards above Quat and Fondor and Corellia. Millions who were conscripted or enslaved or economically coerced into industrial death camps disguised as manufacturing facilities. Millions whose names are forgotten, whose families were destroyed, whose suffering built the Star Destroyers and Death Stars and AT-AT Walkers that the Empire used to wage war across the galaxy. The Empire called it essential war production and emergency labor conscription and compulsory service for the preservation of order. History calls it what it was: slavery, systematic exploitation, industrial murder committed at galactic scale, to feed a war machine that existed primarily to perpetuate its own power. Your journal helped establish that truth, gave voice to the voiceless millions, provided evidence that couldn't be dismissed as rebel propaganda because it came from someone who lived it and died from it. But truth doesn't resurrect the dead or repair broken bodies or erase trauma burned into survivors' minds. Truth doesn't prevent the next authoritarian government from implementing similar programs under different names. Truth is necessary, but insufficient, a foundation for justice, but not justice itself. And justice delayed for millions is justice denied completely. You died believing your suffering served no purpose, that your years in the factory were simply stolen from you, that your broken body and shattered mind were wasteful casualties of Imperial cruelty. But your documentation mattered. Your testimony contributed to the historical record that prevents the Empire from whitewashing its crimes. Your memory, preserved by those who loved you and those who studied what happened, stands as witness to both the human cost of totalitarianism and the resilience of individuals who maintain their humanity, even when treated as machines. This is what it means to work in an Imperial weapons factory. To have your life stolen piece by piece, your body destroyed through systematic exploitation, your spirit broken through calculated cruelty, your death treated as statistically insignificant, and to know, as you're dying far too young with lungs full of scar tissue and blood, that somewhere in the vast machinery of galactic civilization, the exploitation continues, that new factories are opening and new workers are being conscripted, and the cycle repeats because the forces that created your suffering, greed and authoritarianism and the willingness to sacrifice the many for the benefit of the few, remain as powerful as ever. The galaxy is a place of infinite beauty and infinite cruelty, where heroes fight against tyranny while millions of ordinary beings are ground into dust to fuel the machines those heroes fight against. Your story is their story, repeated across worlds and species and generations, the common narrative of the powerless caught in the gears of systems that view them as expendable. And until the fundamental structures that enable such exploitation are dismantled, truly dismantled, not merely reformed or rebranded, the factories will continue operating, the conveyors will continue running, and beings like you will continue dying in industrial hells that exist behind propaganda walls, claiming automation and efficiency while concealing the broken bodies that make production possible. You deserved better. You all deserved better. And the galaxy's failure to provide that better future, to build systems that value life over production and dignity over profit, is an indictment that no military victory or political reform can erase. The smokestacks on Lothal still stand, monuments to industrial murder, and somewhere tonight, smoke rises from factories on 1,000 worlds, carrying the particulate remains of workers whose names will never be recorded, whose families will never know their fate, whose lives were consumed to build weapons for wars that serve no one but those already powerful. This is the truth about Imperial weapons factories. This is the truth about what empires do to ordinary people. This is the truth that must be remembered, documented, and resisted, because forgetting guarantees repetition, and repetition means more beings like you dying in darkness while the galaxy looks away.